Hi, Camille, and hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring the Inner Addict Part 1 with Lisa Saremi. My name is Nicole, and I'm on the Access Elite team that has brought this event to you. For those of you who've been with us before, welcome back. And for those of you who might not be familiar, Access Elite is a health and wellness company providing team building, social wellness, and connection through our on-demand classes and our live events. We're so excited to bring a little bit of positivity and connection to your day. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest today. Lisa is a transformational coach, a marriage and family therapist, and a yoga therapist. And with that, Lisa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Nicole. So we're starting a new 4-week series today. We're going to be diving into an exploration of our inner addict. So without further ado, let's get started. Whoops. Give me 1 second. Let me get it up like a normal slideshow. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So today we're going to begin to explore the dimensions of what an inner addict is, what our inner addict might look like. And I want to invite you to just really move forward today with an open mind, because ultimately part of what we'll be doing is facing our shadow material, which is something hard to look at times. But my intention is that through this series, you have a more robust and expanded view of addiction, what that really is, and how it might actually be present in your life, and how you can work with it. So we'll start today by defining actually what addiction is. And then we're going to dive into the archetypal patterns of the addict. And then we're going to look at potentially where is our own inner addict. So as usual, I highly recommend pen, paper, or something to type on when we get into those parts and pieces. And then how those are actually acting as coping mechanisms. And when did those coping mechanisms turn into addictions? Through the 4-week series, as I said today, we're going to kind of explore all these different dimensions of the word inner addict. Like, what does that actually mean? And then next session, we're going to get more into the cycle, the addictive cycle that many people will experience in their lives. The different ways that addiction can manifest, we'll get more into those details on the 3rd session, and then some ways to regulate our inner addict. So let's start with just the definition of addiction. So in Wikipedia, addiction is defined as the compulsive use of a substance or performance of a behavior that is independent of withdrawal. Addiction can occur in the absence of dependence, and dependence can occur in the absence of addiction, although the two typically roll out together. One of my mentors, Dr. Carol Clark, wrote a book called Addict America, The Lost Connection. And this is where I also get a lot of like my content and richness around addiction, wisdom around addiction. She actually defines addiction as obsessive, compulsive, out of control behavior that is continuing, like we continue to do it in spite of negative consequences, whether those consequences are to ourselves or maybe even to another. Now, there's a little piece in Psychology Today that I wanted to share about. They said there's evidence that addictive behaviors share key neurobiological features. They intensively involve brain pathways of reward and reinforcement, which involve the neurotransmitter dopamine. So maybe some of us have heard of dopamine, maybe some of us have not. Dopamine is a chemical, like our brain is its own pharmacy, and dopamine is one of the chemicals that our brain will produce. And dopamine is really a feel-good hormone that gets released. I could do a whole session just on dopamine itself, so I'll leave it at that. But typically when our tolerance to a substance or a behavior, because even what we'll find as we move through this process is that certain behaviors or states of being can also release this dopamine and can also create an addiction because of the dopamine release to not necessarily always a chemical or a substance, but sometimes to a behavior or a state that we might find ourselves in. So there are brain pathways that, like, if you can imagine, if you took the same path every day, that path would start to get deeper, and over time it would get deeper and deeper. And think about the pathways in our brain in a similar way. And when there's certain behaviors and patterns that continue to be repetitive, those rivets get deeper and deeper. So typically, one of our tolerance to a substance, it increases, right? So even if you're not necessarily identifying as an alcoholic or anything like that, but if we continue to use certain substances or we continue to do certain behaviors, we adapt to the presence of that substance or behavior. So for example, I'm going to pick on myself. I'm on a cleanse right now, and I typically drink coffee every day. So today and yesterday and the day before, no coffee. My body has been withdrawing. I've been experiencing migraines. And for those of us that do drink coffee, we might find that over time, we need a little more. We need a little more. So it's that addiction becomes that insatiability. And then, as Dr. Carol Clark was saying, that insatiability followed through with obsession and compulsion, trying to get that same experience that we did maybe the first few times. So over time, so where the dopamine kind of plays in, and we'll go over it again as we go through this series. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail around it right now, but I want you to consider that whether it's a substance or a behavior, and we're going to dive into that today, to kind of take a look in the mirror and see what are the possibility of addictive behaviors that we might have in our own lives. But every time we do this behavior, it does release dopamine and it feels good. Now here's the thing. If we keep doing it and we keep doing it and we keep doing it, we want more dopamine. And then it becomes this insatiable, never enough type of pattern where all of a sudden something that was not an addiction becomes an addiction over time. So let's dive into the archetype of the addict. And if you're not familiar with what an archetype is, I want you to think of the archetype really as a pattern of behavior that's in the collective. And that pattern of behavior helps us be able to identify or label or define something, right? So the addict has a pattern of behavior through a depth psychological lens, which is one that I use. The addict can be considered a shadow archetype, meaning something that we don't necessarily want to look at, something that we kind of push under and repress. However, within the archetype of the addict, there are some light attributes. So we are going to also visit the lighter pieces. In the light, the addict is able to recognize, to confront, and move through something. In the shadow, the addict is compromising their integrity and their honesty, and they're allowing an addictive pattern to have authority over their own inner spirit. So many people, when I talk about addiction, the reason why I love Dr. Carol Clark's book, Addict America, whoops, if you can see it, is because she helps really remove some of the stigma that can be out there around addiction, because typically when most people hear addiction, they immediately think of substance abuse. They immediately think of like alcoholism or drugs or different types of substances. Food addiction is something. Sex addiction is something. But then there's other types of addictions, like love addiction and sex addiction aren't an actual substance, right? They do and they can invoke the inner pharmacology to release certain hormones like dopamine, and that's what gets it into an addictive pattern. And then when we go into the cycle next week, that'll help us understand it a little more. But we all have cravings, right? So whether you identify as an alcoholic, an addict of any sort or not, as a human being, we have cravings. And most of us have probably gone overboard at some time, right? Maybe it was the holidays, we overate. Maybe it was a good night out, we overdrank, we felt it the next day, it wasn't a good morning. But you know, we all have those tendencies. And then we also may struggle learning discipline, right? So these are just some things that are in the background that not only do addicts struggle with these things, but as human beings, we all experience these things. Now, the addict has this shadow aspect of using a behavior or a substance to numb, to not feel, to disassociate, to avoid depression, they can get into a lot of like overwhelm and self-hatred and shame and really get hard on themselves and experience a lot of unfavorable emotions. So if we can understand that this as part of an archetype, right? Like not a label like you are a drug addict or you are an alcoholic or you are this or you are that, but just like this archetypal pattern that can live in all of us, right? We all have cravings, so do addicts. They just get really big. Many of us may go overboard at times, and addicts too. And we may all struggle to learn discipline, and that I know for the addict archetype is there. Now, the shadow aspect, the numbing out piece of addiction in this archetype, it's just kind of like that dark side of this archetype that can also live in all of us, right? So sometimes we get overwhelmed, or we have unfavorable emotions, or not everybody necessarily self-shames, but we all probably know what it feels like when we don't feel good, when we don't feel like we're in control, and wanting to not feel that way at the end of the day. Wanting to not feel that way. I want you to really let that land, right? Because maybe it's a drink that makes us not feel that way. Maybe it's going to work, right? There's a lot of different ways that addiction can show up as a pattern in our lives and cause havoc, frankly. So when we feel an intense desire for control, the archetype addict, okay, when they feel an intense desire for control, they do the exact opposite, completely losing control, completely losing that discipline, completely losing connection to their strength. So another piece that comes forward with the addict archetype is control and chaos. There's these two little pieces, like there's this world of chaos and this real big desire and need to be in control. And the addiction sometimes becomes the one thing that they can control. So typically, we as human beings also fear chaos, right? We want some type of certainty. We also want a little uncertainty, but we like to know where we're headed. We like to know where our feet are going to land. And we actually value order. We value order, and we don't really like chaos. It doesn't mean that we can't have our own internal chaos, but I'm just saying in general, where we tend to go to is some type of order. And we love predictability. We want other people to be predictable. We want things to be predictable because we don't like uncertainty. We want things to be consistent. and we like to be in control, and we really like to believe that we can minimize the chaos that might come through our lives, right? That as the chaos comes in, that there's still this sense of like, I got it under control. Now, the shadow aspect of the addict is the addict does not like order. Okay, so let's make sure we get that clear here. The shadow aspect of the addict does not like order. So they go through lengths to disrupt the order. They actually go towards chaos. And the interesting thing is that from the perspective of the shadow archetype or shadow addict archetype, they are exerting the control by taking over. So for the woman who is like drained at the end of the day from, let's say, all the work demands, family demands, home demands, the addict part is the part that takes back control. So it sounds paradoxical. You might, even as I'm speaking about it, I notice every time my brain has a little bit of a hard time wrapping around it, but it's like the addiction becomes the one thing that the person can control, even though in it they might feel uncontrollable. Outside of the addiction, outside of that behavior or that pattern, all these other things that are demanding, like family, like work, like home, they feel uncontrollable and chaotic. This comes up a lot too with not food addiction, but food disorders like anorexia and bulimia. There's a very big element of control. So as I'm talking about this, I want you to like internalize that. Like when you think about yourself, when you think about being in control, what is your relationship to that? Are you one that thrives being in control, that yearns to be in control, or maybe not? Now, as we were talking about all of the shadowy parts of the addict, I think that it's definitely worthy to take a moment to speak of the gift of the addict. So for the addict, so the addict itself isn't full shadow, right? There's this shadow quality that the addict can kind of embody. Now, the addict archetype also has the light. Now, the light part of it is that the archetype of the addict can go or leverage some form of belief, faith, greater purpose and meaning, or spirituality to connect to a bigger purpose outside of this other thing that feels like it has a control on them, the addiction. So the addict struggles with not also, which is kind of paradoxical to the last slide, but not being able to be in control of the addiction, not being able to have order and discipline around saying no to engaging in this behavior or in this substance. So in a lot of like 12-step programs and a lot of resources for people that are trying to work through their addiction, we'll find that faith is a big piece. Faith is like the key that gets the addict out of their shadow, that gives them some type of hope, that gives them the strength and the ability to break free from usually these behaviors or self-destructive habits. Now, on the other side, the addict can be humble and can hold the power, or does hold the power, of self-forgiveness. It's from that self-forgiveness. Many people that have or deal with addiction also, right there with the addiction, hold shame. So, and when we're shaming, right, we're definitely not forgiving ourselves. We are making ourselves wrong. We are beating ourselves up. And the inner critic is most likely right there pointing a finger right at you. Now, when that's happening, it's really hard to heal, right? We really have to lean into our faith, lean into this thing that is bigger and greater than us for support and for the ability to transform what might be happening. And so this becomes really a big journey of the mind and the heart, which is one of the longest paths we can ever travel in our lives. In fact, you might even grab that paper and grab that pen or your laptop or whatever you're going to write on. And I want you to just notice or just think for a moment how many times your head, your brain, your mind may feel one way, and then your heart may feel another. Now, every time this happens, there's an opportunity to allow the head and the heart to get into conversation and to find some way to agree or come to consensus and speak truth. When our head goes one way and our head goes another way, the shadow addict breaks through to numb the friction. So this is what may cause the addict to come forward, right? Because it's conflictual. Typically, the mind and the heart are not in congruence, and it actually takes a little bit of our participation to bring them into congruence. So it's kind of like taking the time to find the congruency between these two parts. So that maybe, for example, we get a really dark craving. Maybe somebody's trying to stop a particular behavior or a substance, and the craving shows up. That's part of being human, and it's really, really, really strong. Saying no is an example of this conflict that can occur. It can, when we say no, it can bring in really a deep sense of empowerment and reinforce our truth. Reinforce our truth that we are stronger than the addiction, stronger than the craving, that we are bigger than those things, and that we are capable of the self-discipline, which is the light aspect of the addict when we're able to harness it. And the portal to harness it is through our beliefs, through our faith, whatever that is, right? For each and every one of us, it might look different. So taking that inquiry now, to maybe just take a moment and look, what are your cravings? I want you to go beyond the surface, beyond things like sugary snacks and ice cream and coffee. I want you to think about those things that you just might even be unconscious cravings, things that we just kind of do. Okay, so if I was talking to somebody who might have a relationship with alcohol, I might ask them to look specifically at that craving, right? But if I was talking to a client that tends to run angry a lot or likes to argue a lot, I would consider, how does that craving show up, right? It's not going to be like a rumination, like you might ruminate over ice cream or a drink or whatever that is for you. But yet it becomes this comfortable place to be in anger or in panic. And we can find sometimes that when things are going well, we'll start to create turmoil. So when I'm saying, what are your cravings? I want you to really look. What are your cravings? Are you addicted to work? Is it food? Is it exercise? Is it being anxious or being worried? Is it TV? Is it social media? What are your cravings? Especially the unconscious ones, right? Because even when we grab our phone and we look, screen time, right? It can be unconscious, right? So the craving isn't like we're sitting here and just craving it. It's just we notice, wow, every 5, 10 minutes, whatever it is, I have to grab my phone. Now, if you're grabbing the phone because you're waiting for somebody to send you a message or something like that, then there's different layers, right? So really take the time to peel through the layers of craving. And when does that craving, that need to do something, begin to disrupt the balance in your life? Right? So I know for me, with coffee, it's like, it literally is like the boss of my morning, right? So I could say that in the morning space, coffee for me completely disrupts my balance, because all I'm thinking about is getting that coffee in the morning, right? So it's present in my world right now because I'm on this cleanse, but think about for yourself, what are these cravings and how do they come in and kind of create an imbalance? Are you not exercising because you feel like you have to work more? Are you not eating right because of some other thing? Or maybe your craving is sugar, right? There's many, many layers that addiction can live. And how we unveil what they are, because they're all kind of hidden, sitting in that shadow area. What's the secret desire you're ashamed to admit? I remember my mom told me one day how she loves sweets, and it's not really sweets, it's the carby things, and like in this case it's pumpkin pie. And she told me, she admitted that one day after I left, she didn't want me to see her eating as many pieces of the pumpkin pie, so she had thrown it away in front of me. And then after I left, she got the pie out of the trash. She strategically put it in there so that it wouldn't, be damaged and ate more pie, right? So what secret desire are you ashamed to admit? Or maybe it's something you've done. And then the next question to help support us in kind of just deepening our understanding of self, our behaviors, our cravings, maybe there is an inner addict, right? How are your relationships, your sanity, your income, and security negatively impacted by your addictive behavior? Where does that behavior, that craving, that thing come in and actually become a disruption? And so there's really a quick way to identify the voice of the addict. The inner voice in your head would say something like, I deserve X, Y, and Z. Or what about me? That is the voice of the inner addict. The addict archetype in its shadow is really pointing out where you're lacking, pointing out that something is lacking. And it tries to fill that void for you artificially. So I hope today we were able to shed some light on what addiction is, what the inner addict is, how it might be alive in each and every one of our worlds. It's not just substance abuse. It could be work, it could be stress, it could be sleep, it could be food. I mean, there's all kinds of things. We have to look at our own lives. And then what we're going to do next week is we're going to get into the addictive cycle, because it's a cycle and it begins to feed on itself and it keeps itself alive. And then I talked a little bit about this and a little bit about that, but as far as different types of ways that addiction can manifest today. But I really want to invite you to continue to work with this and continue to even maybe find for yourself how it might be manifesting. And then in week 3, we're going to go through a big, hearty list. And then in week 4, we're going to look at ways that we can regulate this inner addict, this part of us that sometimes feels a little out of control, and that it might be going to things to help regulate itself and struggling in doing that. And with that said, I think most of you already know, but when I work with people, I really integrate yoga, ancient yogic wisdom and practices, and depth psychology for when to really empower themselves in their own healing process. And I do offer all of Access Elite members a discount. So if you're ever interested in a private consultation, feel free to reach out and let me know that you're through the Access Elite channels. Opening it up back to Nicole. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you everyone for joining us. I know this is a topic that's close to everyone's heart in some form or another. But I just want to give you guys a few minutes. If you have any questions right now, we can open up the floor via chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask any questions, we can discuss for a little bit here.
I have a question.
Hi, Kyoko.
Hi. So my addiction is keep on busy myself. Where that coming from? Even though like a few minutes, I have a spare time, I try to schedule something, do something. Is that the part of addiction?
Well, let me ask you a question. I want to go back to I love Dr. Carol Clark. Does it feel to you, Kyoko, does it feel obsessive, compulsive, out of control? And does it have any negative consequences for yourself and for those in your life?
Not much out of control, but I feel if I do not do anything, or like just I feel lazy if I don't do anything.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we're going to start to see with addiction, and this is why I really wanted to take it away from because a lot of times addiction can get pigeonholed with like substances, right? But being busy definitely can be an addiction, and so can like love and relationships. And yet these are things that like we have to do, right? We need each other, we need relationships, we all work, right? So I think the key is really when you're looking at your inner addict is to see if you feel out of control with it and if it's creating negative impacts in your life. So for example, I had a client that every time she would be with her family or her friends, she had to constantly get on her phone. She's always on her phone. It didn't matter who she was with. She was just constantly on her phone. And so the negative impact that began to have in her relationships is that people didn't feel like she was present or fully there, right? So I would look at like your addiction to busyness, like, and look like, are you doing it to avoid? Are you filling your calendar like within an order to, you know?
I think it's a part of habit. Like I'm Japanese, and the Japanese people always think doing, keep on busy, and then one after the other. That's part of our culture.
Yes.
So that's maybe I'm still carrying on.
Yeah,
that's what.
It definitely. So when we get into the cycle next week, I hope you can come. We're going to talk about the release of the dopamine and how that, because, me just grabbing my phone a few times a day is not a big deal, right? But then if every time I'm doing this, I'm getting a release of dopamine in my brain, what happens is I start doing this for that purpose. And I end up in a cycle, and then I never feel like it's enough, So I think there's really like deep addictions that can really like affect people's functionality, their daily life. And then there's other like more subtle things that we might even not notice that we're doing, but maybe they are having. So let me ask you, like, does it bother you that you're busy?
No, it doesn't bother me. I actually like it to be busy.
You like it. And does anybody else around you, are they ever saying anything to you like?
No. I'm just comparing with my friend. Like one of my friend she just stay home and do nothing. That's on her weekend. but compared to me, is I am going there, here, there, talking, checking your emails, going to website. So
I
that's
mean,
my habit.
My personal opinion is if there's no negative consequences in all of your activities, then if it's not negatively affecting you being busy, where it could affect things is if you start to be so busy all the time, it compromises your relationships. You're not able to show up on time. It starts to affect your health.
Oh.
Then it's like a different situation. Then we're like, okay, maybe there's like a little addiction going here. But you might just be somebody that likes to be out and about, and that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Also, a couple of days I send you email. Maybe you can check the email later. I send you email.
Oh, you're going to send me an email?
No, I sent you email a few days ago.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. So I don't know, sometimes going to junk mail. So please check.
I will. Send it again, Kyoko, because I didn't see it. Anything.
Yeah, that's why I thought.
Look.
That's okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. I'm looking forward to diving into this more in depth next week on Tuesday. So we'll see you guys then, but have a great rest of your day. Yeah. All right. Bye, guys.
All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.